The spotlight burned against my eyelids as I stepped onto the stage of Crimson Rose, the city's most exclusive burlesque club. The heat was immediate and suffocating, turning the sequins on my costume into tiny brands against my skin. Not dancing. I'd made that clear during the interview 3 months ago. Never dancing. I was the magician's assistant, the girl who got sawed in half nightly while wearing a frozen smile and enough glitter to blind someone. My hands trembled as I positioned myself inside the trick box, but not from stage fright. I'd done this performance 87 times, 87 nights of folding myself into impossible angles, while Marcello the Magnificent waved his hands and made the audience gasp. No, my hands shook because of the phone call I'd received an hour ago, right before I'd painted on my stage makeup and pretended to be someone who wasn't drowning. Miss Chen, this is Dr. Patel from St. Catherine's. Your mother's kidney function has declined significantly. We need to discuss hospice options. Hospice, the word sat in my chest like a stone. The velvet interior of the trick box smelled like cigarette smoke and desperation, the same scent that clung to everything in this place. Through the deliberately placed gap in the wood, I could see them. Men in $1,000 suits with watches that cost more than my yearly salary, women dripping in diamonds that could pay for a decade of dialysis. They never looked at my face. Their eyes tracked the illusion, the spectacle, the trick. To them, I was a prop, interchangeable, forgettable. But one man always looked at my face. He sat in the VIP section every Friday night, same table, same position, center stage, slightly elevated, positioned for maximum observation. Alone, while everyone else talked, laughed, negotiated deals that would make headlines if anyone knew what was really being discussed, he watched me with eyes like black ice, unblinking, unwavering, intense enough that I could feel his gaze even through the gap in the box, even in the moments when I couldn't see him. Alessandro Marchetti. I'd learned his name from whispers in the dressing room, always spoken with a mix of terror and reverence. The other girls would go quiet when his name came up, exchanging looks that said more than words ever could. Owner of Crimson Rose, owner of half the city's underground operations, owner of things people didn't speak about in daylight, and some things they didn't speak about at all. Marcello's voice boomed over the sound system, announcing the next phase of the trick. I felt the blade slide through the designated slot, the audience gasping on cue. The box rocked slightly as he separated the two halves, creating the illusion that I'd been severed completely. My legs in one box, my torso in another, and somehow still alive, still smiling through the pain that didn't exist. Through the gap, I caught sight of Alessandro again, while everyone else leaned forward. In delighted horror, he remained perfectly still. His expression hadn't changed. He wasn't watching the trick. He was watching me. I'd been working at Crimson Rose for 3 months, 12 weeks, 87 performances, countless hours of wondering how I'd ended up here. And he'd been watching me for 3 months, never approaching, never speaking, never even acknowledging my existence beyond that relentless, penetrating stare. The magician's assistant before me had quit suddenly, I'd heard. No notice, no explanation, just disappeared one day, and the manager had been desperate enough to hire me despite my complete lack of performance experience. You've got the look, he'd said, eyes traveling over me in a way that made my skin crawl. Pretty enough to distract, forgettable enough that no one cares if the trick works. Perfect. I'd needed the money too desperately to be insulted. Marcello was reuniting the boxes now, sliding them back together with theatrical flourish. In a moment, he'd open the lid and I'd emerge, whole and unbroken, and the audience would applaud the miracle of it. Every night, the same routine. Get sawed in half, get put back together, collect my paycheck, visit my mother at the hospital, and try not to think about the word hospice. But tonight felt different. Alessandro's gaze had wait-tonight purpose. He leaned forward slightly in his chair, the first real movement I'd seen from him in 3 months. His hands, elegant, dangerous hands, rested on the table before him, fingers interlaced. Even from this distance, even in the dim lighting, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set like he'd made a decision about something. About what? About whom? The box lid opened. I emerged, arms raised in triumph, smile plastered across my face like I'd rehearsed. The audience applauded, polite, perfunctory, already moving on to their drinks and their deals and their carefully concealed crimes. But Alessandro didn't applaud. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket with precise, deliberate movements, and walked toward the backstage entrance. My stomach dropped. In 3 months, I'd never seen him leave his table during a performance, never seen him move from that position of observation. The other performers had told me stories, girls who'd caught his attention, who'd been summoned to his office. Some came back with expensive gifts and terror in their eyes. Others didn't come back at all, just vanished like they'd never existed, replaced within days. I hurried off stage, my heels clicking against the worn wooden floor of the backstage area. The corridor was narrow, cramped, painted black to hide the years of wear and tear. The glamour of Crimson Rose was entirely for the audience. Behind the curtain, it was all exposed pipes and peeling paint and the overwhelming smell of smoke and sweat. The other girls were already in the dressing room, touching up makeup, changing costumes, preparing for the next act. Nina, one of the dancers, caught my eye in the mirror as I entered. Her expression shifted, concern, maybe, or warning. She started to say something, but then her gaze moved past me to the doorway, and her mouth snapped shut. The manager stood there, blocking my path. Victor, mid-40s, cologne strong enough to weaponize, always standing too close, always watching with those calculating eyes that saw everything in terms of profit and loss. Miss Chen, he said, his accent thick, Russian or Ukrainian, I'd never been sure. Mr. Marchetti wants to see you. The dressing room went silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every movement froze. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Now, I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. His private office, immediately. Victor's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his tone. Jealousy, maybe, or warning, possibly both. Don't keep him waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs. Girls who went too. Alessandro's office came back different, or didn't come back at all. Everyone knew the stories. Everyone whispered about what happened behind that closed door on the top floor, in the office that overlooked the entire club like a surveillance tower. I didn't do anything wrong, I said, more to convince myself than him. Victor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Apparently, you did something right. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. He's waiting. I looked back at the dressing room. Nina's eyes were wide with concern. Svetlana, one of the veteran dancers, shook her head slowly, a warning or farewell, I couldn't tell which. The new girl, barely 18, looked terrified on my behalf. No one said goodbye. Maybe they thought it was bad luck. Maybe they thought it was pointless. I walked. The corridor leading to Alessandro's private elevator seemed longer than it ever had before. My reflection flickered in the mirrors lining the walls, a girl in sequins and stage makeup, glitter in her hair, looking like she belonged in this world of illusion and darkness. But I could see past the costume. I could see the biochemistry graduate who'd been 3 months away from defending her thesis, the daughter who'd abandoned her dreams to work double shifts at a dialysis center, the desperate woman who'd taken a job in a mob-owned club because the tips were good and the questions were few. The elevator doors opened silently, gilt and mirrors, completely at odds with the shabby backstage area. I stepped inside. Victor didn't follow. The doors closed, sealing me in, and the elevator began to rise. My hands trembled. I pressed them against my thighs, trying to steady myself, but it didn't help. threw the phone in my purse, my old, cracked phone that I'd been too broke to replace. Dr. Patel's words echoed, hospice options. My mother was dying, and I was ascending to face a man whose reputation was built on bodies and blood and deals made in shadow, a man who'd been watching me for 3 months with the patience of a predator studying prey. The elevator slowed, stopped, the doors opened. Alessandro Marchetti's private office was nothing like the gothic opulence of the club below. It was minimalist, almost clinical, white walls, contemporary art that probably cost more than my mother's entire medical debt, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city like a surveillance system designed by God. The lights of the city spread below, thousands of lives unaware they were being watched from above. Alessandro stood with his back to me, hands clasped behind him, perfectly still. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been constructed on his body, which it probably had. His dark hair was cut precisely, not a strand out of place. Even from behind, even in stillness, he radiated control, authority, danger. "Miss Chen," he said without turning, his voice smooth and dark like expensive whiskey, "close the door behind you." I did, hearing the lock click automatically. The sound felt final. "Please," he continued, still not turning, "come here." My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me across the pristine white floor toward the windows where he stood. I stopped a few feet behind him, close enough to smell his cologne, something subtle and probably obscenely expensive, nothing like Victor's aggressive assault. For a long moment, he said nothing. We stood in silence, him watching the city, me watching him, both of us waiting for something neither of us had named. Then he turned, and the full force of his attention hit me like a physical blow. Alessandro Marchetti was beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful, sharp edges, dark eyes that reflected nothing, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile genuinely years ago. He was perhaps 35, though it was hard to tell. Men like him existed outside normal aging, preserved by wealth and power and the kind of control that kept chaos at bay. "Leela Chen," he said, my name rolling off his tongue like he'd practiced it, like he'd said it to himself in private moments. 26 years old, graduated top of your class in biochemistry from State University, full scholarship. You were 3 months from defending your master's thesis when you disappeared from academia entirely. Ice flooded my veins, my breath caught in my throat. "How do you?" "Your mother," he continued, cutting off my question with the casual ease of someone who held all the cards. "Margaret Chen, chronic kidney disease, stage 5, 14 months on the transplant list with no compatible matches. Dialysis 3 times weekly at St. Catherine's Medical Center. Bills currently totaling $347,000 and climbing by approximately $4,000 per week." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He knew everything, everything. The debt I'd hidden from everyone, the desperation I'd tried to mask, the slow death I was watching happen in real time. "Why am I here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. Alessandro stepped closer, not threatening. His movements were too controlled for that, but deliberate. Each step calculated to close the distance between us, to make me feel the weight of his presence. "Because you're wasting your potential in a magic box," he said, his dark eyes fixed on mine with unsettling intensity, "and I don't tolerate waste." Alessandro finally turned from the window, and Leela's breath caught. She'd seen him from a distance for months, always in the VIP section, always watching, but up close he was devastatingly different. Not handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too sharp, his dark eyes too intense, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow too prominent. But there was something magnetic about him, something that made the air in the room feel charged. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the white leather chairs facing his desk, not a request. Leela's legs moved before her brain could protest. The chair was softer than anything in her apartment, enveloping her like a cloud. She hated how good it felt. Alessandro didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against his desk, studying her with those unnerving eyes. Then he began to speak, and Leela's world tilted. Leela Chen, 26 years old, born in Queens to immigrants, your father from Beijing, your mother from Taiwan. He died when you were 14. Construction accident, though the company claimed negligence couldn't be proven. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was reading a grocery list. You graduated valedictorian from Forest Hills High School, full scholarship to Columbia, biochemistry major, summa cum laude. Started your master's program, focusing on innovative pain management compounds, 3 months from your thesis defense when you vanished. Each word was a hammer blow. Leila's fingers dug into the chairs. Armrests, how do you? Your mother, Mei-Ling Chen, was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease 18 months ago. It progressed to stage 5 4 months ago. She's been on the transplant list for 14 months. Blood type B negative makes matching difficult. She receives dialysis 3 times a week at St. Catherine's Hospital, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 7 a.m. slot. He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. You owe $347,000 in medical debt. Your mother's insurance lapsed when she could no longer work at the textile factory. You've maxed out 4 credit cards. You sold your car, your laptop, your grandmother's jade necklace, the one she brought from Taiwan. Leela felt like she was drowning. This stranger knew everything. Every humiliation, every desperate choice, every sleepless night spent calculating how many days of medication she could afford versus groceries. Stop, she whispered. He didn't. You took the job. At Crimson Rose 3 months ago, told your mother you were working as a cocktail waitress. She doesn't know about the magic shows, about the costume that barely covers anything, about the men who leer while you pretend to be sawed in half. His jaw tightened slightly. She doesn't know you considered the other offers, the private rooms upstairs, the real money, but you drew your line there, barely. How do you know all this? Her voice cracked, tears threatening. Why would you? Because I make it my business to know about wasted potential, Alessandro interrupted. For the first time, emotion flickered across his face, something that might have been anger. Because watching brilliance rot offends me on a fundamental level. He pushed off from the desk, began pacing. The contained energy in his movements reminded Lila of a caged panther. You had a gift, Miss Chen. Your research into non-opioid pain management compounds was revolutionary. Your professors called you the most promising student they'd seen in a decade. You were 3 months away from changing the world. He stopped directly in front of her. And now you're a prop in a magic show, letting mediocre men saw you in half for tips that won't even cover your mother's next dialysis session. The tears came then, hot and shameful. She'd held them back for 3 months, but somehow this stranger's clinical recitation of her failures broke the dam. You think I don't know that, she spat through the tears. You think I don't lie awake every night thinking about what I gave up, but what was I supposed to do? Let her die, choose my career over my mother's life. No, his voice gentled slightly. You did what you had to do. The system failed you, not the other way around. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a thick folder. I need a biochemist, someone who understands compound verification, purity testing, lab management. My pharmaceutical division requires someone with your specific expertise. Layla's tears stopped. Your pharmaceutical division, you mean? Legal products mostly. His smile was sharp. Prescription medications for private practices, pain management for discreet clients, nothing that would violate your ethics. Much. You mean you need someone to help criminals, she said flatly. His laugh was unexpected, rich, and genuine. I mean people who value privacy over bureaucracy, people who need help the traditional system won't provide. He set the folder on the coffee table between them. Tell me, Miss Chen, is the system that let your mother suffer for 18 months really the moral high ground you want to defend? She stared at the folder like it might bite her. What makes you think I'd work for you? Because you're out of options, he said simply. Because you're brilliant and dying inside that magic box. Because your mother needs a kidney transplant, not just dialysis. He tapped the folder. And because I'm offering you everything the system wouldn't. Against her better judgment, Lila reached for the folder. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first page made her gasp. Employment contract, Marchetti Pharmaceutical Division. Annual salary, $200,000. The second page made her vision blur. Comprehensive medical coverage, including immediate family members. Coverage includes organ transplant procedures, all associated costs, post-operative care. The third page was a pre-authorization form from Mount Sinai Hospital's Transplant Center. Her mother's name was already filled in, approved for immediate kidney transplant evaluation, all costs covered, priority status granted. She couldn't finish. Your mother could be in surgery within 2 weeks, Alessandro said quietly. The best surgeons in the country, private recovery suite, full rehabilitation. She could live, Miss Chen, really live, not just survive between dialysis. Possessions. Leela's hand covered her mouth. This was impossible. It had to be a trick, a trap, something. What do you want from me? She whispered. Really want? Alessandro was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more dangerous somehow. I want you to stop dying in that box. I want you to use the mind God gave you for something more than entertainment. He paused, and for just a second his mask slipped. Something raw and hungry flickered in his eyes. I want to see who you really are when you're not just surviving. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest. This was wrong. Every instinct screamed that Alessandro Marchetti was dangerous, that this would end badly, that men like him didn't give without taking everything. But her mother could live. Her brilliant, loving, dying mother could live. If I say yes, she said slowly, I'm not agreeing to anything beyond the lab work. I'm not, she gestured vaguely at herself, at him, at the space between them. I'm not asking for anything beyond your expertise, he said, but the way his eyes tracked her movement, the way his body tensed when she shifted in her chair, suggested otherwise. She thought of her mother that morning, barely able to stand after dialysis, thought of the hospice pamphlets hidden in her apartment, the ones she couldn't bear to read, thought of the promise she'd made at her father's funeral to take care of her mother no matter what. I need to think. No, his voice was firm but not unkind. You need to decide, now, tonight, because tomorrow morning that authorization expires and your mother goes back to the bottom of the transplant list. It was manipulation, pure and simple, but it was also the truth. Layla could see it in his eyes. This offer wouldn't come again. Her hand found the pen he'd placed beside the folder. Such a small thing, a pen, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. If I sign this, can I trust you to keep your word? Alessandro's smile was dangerous and beautiful. I'm many things, Miss Chen, but I'm not a liar. Everything in that contract will be honored. And the things not in the contract. His eyes darkened. Those will negotiate as they arise. The threat and promise in those words should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself leaning forward, pen poised over the signature line. One last moment of hesitation. one last chance to walk away, to choose poverty with principles over wealth with compromise. Then she thought of her mother's face when she told her about the transplant. Lila signed her name. Alessandro's entire body seemed to relax, as if he'd been holding his breath. He took the folder with hands that seemed to tremble slightly, surely a trick of the light. "Welcome to your new life, Miss Chen." The way he said it, possessive and satisfied, made her wonder what exactly she just agreed to. But when he smiled, a real smile this time, unguarded and almost boyish, something in her chest fluttered. "This is a mistake, asterisk," her brain insisted. "But it's a mistake that will save Mom, asterisk," her heart replied. As Alessandro pressed a button on his desk, summoning someone to escort her out, he said quietly, "Your mother's evaluation is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. A car will pick you both up at 7. "Tomorrow, but how did you?" She stopped. Of course, he'd known she would say yes. He'd probably known before she walked in. "What if I'd said no?" she asked at the door. Alessandro's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then I would have found another way to convince you. But we both know you were never going to say no, Miss Chen, not when it comes to her." He was right, and they both knew it. As the door closed behind her, Layla heard him say, almost to himself, "Finally." She pretended not to hear. Pretended not to notice how his eyes had followed her to the door like a starving man watching a feast. Pretended not to feel the invisible chains already forming around her wrists. The contract lay between them like a living thing, its crisp white pages somehow managing to gleam in the office's soft lighting. Leela stared at the hospital authorization form, her mother's name typed in neat letters, the words "approved for immediate kidney transplant evaluation" burning into her retinas. "This can't be real," she whispered, though she'd already signed. The ink was still wet, gleaming black against white. Her signature looked foreign to her, like someone else had written it. "It's very real." Alessandro moved around the desk, each step deliberate. He didn't walk so much as prowl, and Leela found herself pressing back into the chair. "By tomorrow afternoon, your mother will be admitted to Mount Sinai's transplant unit. Dr. Harrison, you've heard of him." She had the man who'd successfully transplanted kidneys for senators, celebrities, people whose names appeared in newspapers for their wealth rather than their suffering. "He doesn't take regular patients," she said numbly. "He does now." Alessandro stopped just outside her personal space, but she could still smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that made her think of winter forests. "He'll personally oversee your mother's case, the compatibility testing, the surgery when a match is found, the recovery, everything." "A match could take years." 6 weeks, his certainty was absolute, 8 at most. Leela's head snapped up. "That's impossible. B-negative blood type, her antibody profile." "I have resources," he interrupted. "International registries that aren't accessible through normal channels, private donors who are incentivized to participate, legal channels," he added at her expression, "mostly." There was that word again, mostly. It should terrify her. Instead, she found herself calculating probabilities, hope blooming in her chest like a poisonous flower. "Why me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You could hire any biochemist. Why go to this trouble for someone who was working in a magic box?" For a moment, Alessandro's mask slipped entirely. Something raw and hungry flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. He turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the city. "Because I've watched you hold yourself together for 3 months with nothing but determination." His voice was different now, stripped of its earlier command. Do you know what you look like in that box, Miss Chen? The question was so unexpected she couldn't answer. You look like you're dying, he continued. Every night a little more light goes out, but you never let them see it. You smile, you perform, you endure the leering and the catcalls and the degradation, because your mother needs you too. He turned back to her, and his eyes were burning. Because talent like yours should heal, not hide. Because brilliance shouldn't be wasted on men who see you as decoration. Because, he stopped abruptly, jaw clenching. Because what? She pressed, though part of her didn't want to know. Because you deserve better than what this world has given you. The words seemed to pain him, and I'm in a position to provide it. Leela stood, the contract clutched in her hands. That's not an answer, that's deflection. His smile was sharp. Clever girl, fine, you want the truth. He stepped closer, and this time she didn't retreat. 3 months ago, you walked into my club in that ridiculous costume, and I thought you were just another desperate girl making bad choices. Then I watched you, really watched you. Another step. They were close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The way you protected the other girls from handsy customers, the way you tutored that bartender in chemistry because she mentioned wanting to go back to school, the way you never ever gave up, even when giving up would have been easier. His hand rose, hovering near her cheek but not touching. You're not just brilliant, Leela, you're good. Genuinely, stupidly, stubbornly good, and that's rare in my world. So you want to corrupt me? The words came out breathier than intended. No, his hand dropped. I want to protect you from the world that's crushing you, from the system that failed you, he paused, from people like me, ironically enough. By making me work for you. By giving you the resources to be who you were meant to be. He moved back to his desk, creating distance between them. The lab work is real. The salary is real. Your mother's treatment is real. Everything else, he shrugged, we'll see. Leela looked down at the contract again. Her mother could live. Really live, not just survive between dialysis sessions, watching game shows and pretending she wasn't dying. She could travel again, could see the cherry blossoms in Japan like she'd always dreamed, could maybe even live to see grandchildren. What kind of daughter would choose principles over her mother's life? If I do this, she said slowly, I need boundaries, rules. Name them. I won't do anything illegal. Your work will be entirely legal verification and testing. I'm not part of whatever else you might want. She gestured vaguely between them. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, disappointment. I'm not asking for anything beyond your professional expertise, Miss Chen. And my mother never knows the details. She thinks this is a legitimate pharmaceutical company. It is legitimate. The clients are just selective. She took a deep breath. How do I know you won't use this against me? The medical bills, the treatment. How do I know you won't hold it over my head? Alessandro pulled another document from his desk. Irrevocable medical trust, already established. Your mother is the sole beneficiary. Once I sign this, I can't withdraw the funds or cancel the coverage, regardless of your employment status. You could quit tomorrow and she'd still receive treatment. Leela's hands shook as she read the document. It was everything he promised. Ironclad, irreversible, complete coverage. This must have cost a fortune to set up. Money is just paper, Miss Chen. Talent is irreplaceable. She thought of her thesis advisor's words when she'd withdrawn. You're throwing away your future, Leela. You'll regret this. Maybe she would. Maybe this was the moment she'd look back on as the beginning of the end. Or maybe it was the beginning of something else entirely. I accept, she said, the words feeling like a key turning in a lock. Alessandro smiled, not the sharp, dangerous smile from before, but something softer, almost relieved, as if he'd been genuinely afraid she might refuse, as if her acceptance meant something beyond mere business. He signed the medical trust with a flourish, then handed it to her. Your mother's evaluation is tomorrow at 9. A car will pick you both up at 7. You already said that earlier. I wanted to make sure you heard it. He moved closer again, that predatory grace making her pulse race. This time tomorrow, Miss Chen, your old life will be over. Are you prepared for that? My old life ended when my mother got sick, she replied. I'm just choosing which new life to live. Wise choice, he reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was barely there, but it burned like a brand. I'll take care of you, Leela, both of you. You have my word. The possessive note in his voice should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch just for a moment before stepping back. Your word, she repeated, the word of a man who runs a criminal empire. The word of a man who keeps his promises, he corrected. Ask anyone who's dealt with me. I'm many things, but I'm not a liar. As if summoned, the door opened. Marco stood there, the same man from the manager's office earlier, she realized, built like a boxer, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Take Miss Chen home, Alessandro instructed. Ensure she has everything she needs for tomorrow. Marco nodded, the security detail already in place. Alessandro's eyes never left Leila's face. She doesn't need to know the details yet. Security detail, Leila's stomach dropped. What security detail? Protection, Alessandro said simply. You're valuable now, Miss Chen. That comes with certain precautions. You're having me watched. I'm having you protected. There's a difference. Was there? His smile was dark. You'll learn. Marco cleared his throat. Miss Chen, whenever you're ready. She looked between them, Marco waiting patiently, Alessandro watching with those intense eyes that seemed to see straight through her. The contract was signed. The decision was made. There was no going back now. Tomorrow at 7, she confirmed. Tomorrow at 7, Alessandro agreed. The beginning of your new life. As she followed Marco to the door, Alessandro called out, Lila. She turned. He stood silhouetted against the window, the city lights creating a halo effect around him, beautiful and dangerous, like a fallen angel. Thank you, he said simply, for saying yes. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. You didn't really give me a choice. There's always a choice. You chose your mother. You chose hope. You chose to trust me, even if just a little. He paused. That means more than you. No. The weight of his words followed her out of the office, down the elevator, into the car Marco had waiting. It wasn't until she was halfway home that she realized what bothered her most about the encounter. Alessandro Marchetti hadn't looked at her like a boss evaluating an employee. He'd looked at her like a man who'd finally found what he'd been searching for. And God help her, part of her had liked it. The contract sat in her lap, her signature drying into permanence. She'd sold herself to the devil to save her mother, but as the city lights blurred past the window, Leela couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the devil had been waiting specifically for her. Tomorrow would bring the hospital, the evaluation, the beginning of her mother's journey back to health. It would also bring her first real day in Alessandro's world, a world of shadows and money and dangerous men who kept their promises. She thought of his touch on her cheek. Gentle despite the violence she knew those hands were capable of. Thought of the relief in his eyes when she'd said yes. Thought of the way he'd said her name like it was something precious. This was definitely a mistake. But it was a mistake that would save her mother's life. And maybe a treacherous part of her mind whispered it was a mistake that would save hers too, just not in the way she expected. The car pulled up to her building, her old, rundown building with its broken elevator and water-stained walls. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she'd step fully into Alessandro Marchetti's world. Tonight, she'd hold her mother and tell her the good news, leaving out the details that would terrify her. Tonight, she'd pretend this was just a job, just a lucky break, just a boss with too much money and a need for good biochemists. Tonight, she'd ignore the invisible chains she could already feel forming. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face. The truth, she hadn't just signed a contract. She'd signed herself over to a man who'd been watching her, wanting her, planning this moment for longer than she knew. And the most terrifying part of her was eager to find out why. Alessandro's Pav asterisk. Alessandro Marchetti stood at his office window, watching the taillights of the car carrying Leela disappear into the night. His hand pressed against the glass where her reflection had been moments before, and for the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd just done. He'd acquired her, saved her, trapped her. All three, perhaps. The office still smelled faintly of her, something clean and soft like jasmine soap. Nothing expensive, nothing designed to entice, just her. It was intoxicating in its simplicity. Boss, Marco's voice came through the intercom. She's home safe. Security teams are in position. Good, Alessandro didn't move from the window, and the mother's already has an appointment confirmation on her phone. She'll think it's a miracle from the hospital's charity program. Alessandro smiled darkly. Let Leela tell whatever lies she needed. He'd protect them both, even from the truth if necessary. Especially from the truth. Because the truth was that Alessandro Marchetti had been obsessed with Leela Chen for 18 months, long before she'd ever walked into his club, long before her world had fallen apart. Long before he'd orchestrated the pieces to ensure she'd have no choice but to accept his offer. 18 months ago. The medical conference had been tedious. Another obligation, another room full of legitimate businessmen pretending they didn't know exactly what Alessandro really did. He'd been planning to leave after the opening speeches, but then she'd taken the stage. Current pain management protocols are failing our most vulnerable populations, she'd said, her voice clear and passionate. We're so afraid of addiction that we're letting people suffer. There has to be a better way. She'd been vibrant then, healthy, glowing with purpose. Her presentation on alternative pain management compounds had been brilliant, revolutionary even, but it was the fire in her eyes that had captured him, the genuine desire to heal rather than profit. Alessandro had built an empire on reading people, on understanding what they wanted and what they'd do to get it. But Leela Chen wanted nothing for herself. Every word, every gesture, every passionate argument was about helping others. He'd never seen anything like it. Find out everything about her, he'd told Marco that night. The background check had been thorough. Working-class immigrants, father's death, mother's illness just beginning. Leela's brilliant academic record, her scholarship, her research that danced on the edge of breakthrough. And her fatal flaw, she'd choose her mother over herself every single time. Alessandro had tried to forget her. He'd built his empire on control, on emotional detachment. Women were transactions, beautiful, temporary, forgettable. But Leela's presentation haunted him, her passion, her brilliance, the way she'd argued with a professor who'd suggested her research wasn't commercially viable. "I'm not trying to get rich," she'd snapped. "I'm trying to help people." As if the two were mutually exclusive, as if wealth was inherently corrupt. She was naive, idealistic, everything his world would destroy. So he'd stayed away, watched from a distance as her mother's illness progressed, as the medical bills mounted, as the system she believed in failed her completely. He'd even donated anonymously to her university program, too late, always too late. He'd told himself he was being noble, letting her live her life, make her choices, find her own way. Then she'd walked into Crimson Rose 3 months ago. Alessandro had been in the VIP section, discussing territory disputes with the Calabrese family, when she'd appeared in that ridiculous magician's assistant costume. Sequined, revealing, so different from the professional woman at the conference. But her eyes were the same, dimmed, exhausted, but still defiant. "Who is that?" he'd asked the manager. "New girl, Layla something. She's just temporary, needs money for medical bills." Medical bills, of course. He'd watched her perform that first night, letting herself be sawed in half for the entertainment of criminals and addicts. The metaphor was so obvious it hurt. Life was literally cutting her in pieces. "I want to buy this place," he'd told Marco that night. "The club, it's not for sale." "Everything's for sale." It had taken 2 weeks and an exorbitant amount of money, but Alessandro had acquired Crimson Rose, not for the territory, not for the profit, but for proximity to Lafern. 3 months of watching her die a little each night, 3 months of growing obsession, of dreams where she looked at him with something other than fear, 3 months of planning exactly how to save her in a way she couldn't refuse. The pharmaceutical division had been real. He did need someone with her expertise, but he could have hired a dozen biochemists without the elaborate production, without the surveillance, the preparation, the carefully orchestrated trap. "You're playing with fire," his sister had warned him last week. "This isn't like you, Alessandro. You don't get involved." But he was already burning. The way she protected the other girls at the club, the way she counted her tips with shaking fingers, calculating if she had enough for her mother's medication, the way she still helped that bartender study chemistry, even when exhausted. She was everything his world wasn't: genuine, compassionate, unbroken despite life's best. Neverds. He'd known eventually someone else would notice her. The Calvettis had started sniffing around 2 weeks ago, asking questions about the smart girl in the magic show. They'd somehow gotten word of her abandoned research, the compound that could neutralize pharmaceutical tracking agents. That had accelerated his timeline. He couldn't wait any longer, couldn't risk her accepting an offer from someone else, someone who wouldn't protect her, someone who would use her and discard her. Someone who wasn't already in love with her. The word sat heavy in his mind. Love. Alessandro Marchetti didn't believe in love. Love was weakness, vulnerability, a luxury he couldn't afford. But what else could explain the way his chest tightened when she smiled? The violence he'd felt toward every man who leered at her in that costume, the careful orchestration of her rescue. He'd memorized her mother's medical records, found the best doctors before she knew she'd need them, set up the security details before she knew she was in danger, created a golden cage so beautiful she might not notice the bars. "She'll hate you when she finds out," he told his reflection in the window. But hatred was better than indifference. Hatred meant feeling something, and after watching her slowly dying in that magic box, he'd take any emotion he could get. His phone buzzed, a message from the security detail. Subject is with her mother, telling her about tomorrow's appointment. Both are crying. A happy tears, he hoped, the first of many. Alessandro moved to his desk, pulling out a file he'd hidden even from Marco. Photos of Leela from the past 18 months, at the conference, glowing with purpose, at the university, laughing with classmates, at her father's grave, shoulders shaking with grief. He wasn't proud of the surveillance, but he'd needed to know her, to understand her, to find the perfect way to save her without destroying who she was. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 18 months learning everything about Leela Chen, and she'd known nothing about him until tonight. She thought this was sudden, a lucky break, a desperate choice made in a moment of crisis. She had no idea she'd been hunted by a patient predator who'd been circling her for over a year. "Forgive me," he whispered to her photo, the one from the conference, where she'd been so alive, so free. Tomorrow, she'd begin working for him. She'd step into his world of shadows and compromises. She'd learn to navigate the gray areas she'd always avoided. But she'd also have resources to continue her research. Her mother would live. The security he provided would keep her safe from the Calvettis and others who would use her gifts for true evil. He was saving her, even if it meant damning himself. Alessandro's phone rang, the Calvetti representative, right on schedule. "We hear you've acquired a new asset," the voice said, the girl from the club. "She's under my protection," Alessandro replied, ice in his voice. "Her research could be valuable to all of us. Perhaps we could share." "She's mine," the words came out more possessive than intended, non-negotiable. A pause. "You're making this personal, Marchetti. That's not like you." No, it wasn't, but Leela Chen had unmade him from the moment she'd taken that conference stage, passionate about healing in a world devoted to harm. "Anyone who touches her or her mother dies," Alessandro said simply. "Pass the message along." He ended the call. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Leela would eventually discover the depth of his obsession. She'd realize the cage was more elaborate than she imagined. She'd understand that her savior was also her captor. But tonight she was safe. Her mother would live. Her brilliance would flourish. And maybe, eventually, she'd look at him with something other than gratitude mixed with fear. Maybe she'd see past the monster to the man who'd been willing to burn down the world just to keep her warm. Alessandro picked up the contract she'd signed, running his finger over her signature. Such a small thing, ink on paper, but it bound her to him in ways she couldn't imagine yet. "You chose your mother," he said to the empty office, "but I chose you, Leela Chen. 18 months ago, I chose you." The city lights sparkled below, indifferent to his confession. Somewhere out there, Leela was probably lying awake, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. If she only knew the truth, that she'd walked into a trap 18 months in the making, set by a man who'd fallen in love with her before they'd ever spoken. Would she run? Or would she understand that everything, the club purchase, the job offer, the medical coverage, even letting her struggle for 3 months to make the rescue more acceptable, had been because he couldn't bear to watch her light go out? Alessandro smiled darkly at his reflection. She'd know eventually. The truth always surfaced, and when it did, he'd deal with her anger, her betrayal, her hatred. Because Leela Chen was his now, the contract made it legal. But his obsession had made it inevitable from the moment she'd stood on that conference stage, blazing with purpose, completely unaware that a monster in the audience had just found his salvation. Or his damnation. Time would tell which. The black SUV arrived at exactly 7 a.m., just as promised. Leela had been awake since 4, sitting at her mother's bedside, watching her sleep. In the early morning light, she could see how thin her mother had become, how the illness had carved away everything excess, leaving only the essential. Miss Chen, the driver, was young, professional, with an earpiece that suggested he was more than just a chauffeur. "Mr. Marchetti sent me." He handed her a phone, sleek, new, expensive. "This is for work purposes. Your personal phone stays home when you're at the facility. Security protocol." Already the rules were beginning. Leela pocketed the device, noting it had only one contact programmed, A. Marchetti. "My mother's appointment. Another car will collect her at 8:30. Everything's arranged." He opened the rear door for her. "Mr. Marchetti is waiting at the laboratory." The ride took them away from the city center, toward an industrial district that had been revitalized with gleaming office buildings. The car pulled up to a building that looked aggressively legitimate, all glass and steel, with Marchetti Pharmaceutical Research in subtle letters above the entrance. Alessandro stood at the entrance, different from last night. Gone was the dangerous club owner in designer suits. This morning he wore a simple black sweater and dark pants, looking almost normal, except for the way he watched her exit the car, like a hawk tracking. "Bray." "Good morning, Layla." The way he said her name, possessive, satisfied, made her shiver. "Ready to see your new domain." "My domains." "The laboratory you'll be running." He placed his hand on her lower back, guiding her through the security checkpoint. The guard nodded respectfully, scanning her credentials without question. "Everything you need to do the work you were meant to do." The lobby was pristine, featuring abstract art and a water feature that probably cost more than her annual rent. But it was the security that caught her attention. Cameras everywhere, subtle but comprehensive. Biometric scanners at every access point. Guards who looked like they could handle more than checking badges. "Paranoid much," she murmured. "Careful," Alessandro corrected. "The distinction matters in my world." The elevator required his thumbprint and a code. As they rose to the 4th floor, he explained, 3 levels. First floor is legitimate pharmaceutical. Packaging and distribution. Second floor handles prescription fulfillment for private practices. Third floor is research and development, your area. And the 4th floor. Executive offices, mine specifically. His smile was sharp, "so I can keep an eye on my investments." The elevator opened to reveal a corridor that belonged in a high-tech thriller. White walls, sealed doors with biometric locks, the subtle hum of air filtration systems. Alessandro led her through, his hand never leaving her back. "This wing handles prescription pain management," he said, gesturing to a viewing window. Inside, technicians in full cleanroom gear worked at stations, measuring and verifying compounds. Completely legal. We supply several private practices that cater to discreet clients. Discreet meaning criminal. Discreet meaning people who value privacy. He guided her further. "This wing handles anxiety medications. Same principle. Legal prescriptions, private. Clients." They passed another secured door. This one had additional locks, warning signs. Alessandro didn't offer to show her inside. "What's in there?" "Nothing that concerns you." His tone suggested the topic was closed. Yet. He stopped at a door marked Laboratory Suite A Director. His thumbprint and a code opened it, revealing a space that made Leela's breath catch. The laboratory was everything she dreamed of during graduate school. state-of-the-art mass spectrometers, nuclear magnetic resonance machines, high-performance liquid chromatography systems, equipment that most universities couldn't afford. Along one wall, a complete synthesis setup with fume hoods that looked like they'd never been used. She couldn't finish. Yours, Alessandro said simply. Everything here is yours to command. She moved through the space like a child in a candy store, running her fingers over equipment that probably cost more than most. People's houses, the chemical library alone was worth millions, rare compounds, reference standards, everything needed for serious analytical work. You'll have 2 assistants, Alessandro continued, watching her explore with an intensity that made her self-conscious. They're waiting in the conference room. The conference room adjoined the lab, all glass walls and modern furniture. 2 people rose as they entered. Marco, you've met, the boxer-built man from last night nodded. He'll handle security concerns and special requests. Leela frowned. Why does a lab need security? Because some of our clients are targets, Marco said simply, and now so are you. Before she could process that, Alessandro gestured to the second person, a young woman, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and hands that wouldn't stay still. This is Nina, chemistry PhD from NYU, specializing in analytical methods. She'll handle the routine verification work. Nina offered a trembling handshake. It's an honor, Miss Chen. I've read your papers on non-opioid pain management. Your approach to compound modification was brilliant. Thank you. Layla noticed the way Nina kept glancing at Alessandro, like a mouse watching a cat. How long have you worked here? 6 months, Nina said quietly. Then, even quieter, Mr. Marchetti recruited me personally, like you. There was a warning in those words, but before Layla could pursue it, Alessandro intervened. Nina, show Miss Chen the current project files. Marco, security briefing in an hour. He turned to Leela, and his expression softened marginally. Your office is through there. Everything's been set up according to your specifications. My specifications? I didn't give any. Your published papers suggested certain preferences, temperature controls, lighting wavelengths, organizational systems. He moved closer, voice dropping. I pay attention to details, Leela, especially yours. The weight of that statement hung between them. How long had he been studying her? How much did he really know? I have a meeting, he said, stepping back. Nina will explain your duties. Marco will handle security protocols. If you need anything, you call me. He tapped the phone in her pocket. That's what it's for. He left and the room seemed to exhale. Nina immediately relaxed, shoulders dropping from their defensive position. He's intense, Layla said carefully. Nina laughed, but it sounded strained. That's one word for it. Come on, let me show you what you've gotten yourself into. The next hour was a whirlwind of information. Client files, names redacted, compound verification protocols, purity testing requirements. Everything seemed legitimate, even boring, until Nina pulled up a specific folder. These are the priority clients, she said quietly. Their prescriptions get verified first, no questions asked. Layla recognized some of the compound combinations, heavy-duty pain management, anxiety medications at the upper limits of legal dosing. These are aggressive protocols. They're dangerous people with dangerous lives, Nina said. Gunshot wounds, broken bones, conditions they can't explain to regular doctors. Mr. Marchetti provides medical care for people outside the system. You mean criminals? I mean people who pay very well for discretion and quality. Nina glanced at the door, then leaned closer. Look, you seem nice, so I'm going to give you advice I wish someone had given me. Don't cross him. Don't dig too deep. Do the work, take the money, and don't ask questions about the fourth floor or the restricted wing. What's on the fourth floor besides offices? Nina's face went pale. His private lab. No one goes there except him. Someone tried once, a technician who got curious. He disappeared. Officially, he relocated to the West Coast. Unofficially, she shrugged. Before Layla could respond, Marco returned. Security briefing time. The next hour was sobering. Protocols for entering and leaving the building. Panic buttons hidden throughout the lab. Code words for different threat levels. Routes to safe rooms. This seems excessive for a pharmaceutical lab, Layla said. 3 months ago, the Calvettis tried to kidnap one of our researchers, Marco said bluntly. Wanted to force him to synthesize something off books. Mr. Marchetti got him back, but the researcher was damaged. Now we don't take chances. The Calvettis. Competing family. They're particularly interested in pharmaceutical advantages, untraceable compounds, enhanced interrogation drugs, things like that. Marco studied her. They'd be very interested in someone with your background. My background is legitimate research. Your thesis research could be weaponized, Marco interrupted. A compound that neutralizes tracking agents. Do you understand what that's worth in our world? Our world, as if she was already part of it. I didn't finish that research. It was theoretical. Theoretical is enough for desperate people. Marco's expression was serious. Mr. Marchetti's protection is the only reason you're safe. Remember that. The rest of the day passed in a blur of familiarization. The compounds she'd be testing, the verification protocols, the chain of custody for sensitive materials. Everything was more complex than she'd expected, but also more legitimate. Most of the work really was legal pharmaceutical verification. At 3 p.m., the new phone buzzed, Alessandro's name on the screen. Your mother is out of evaluation. Everything went perfectly. Surgery scheduled for next week. Layla's knees went weak with relief. Next week, that's impossible. I told you I have resources. A pause. There's a car waiting to take you to the hospital. She's asking for you. I'm supposed to work until. Your mother comes first. Always, that's not negotiable. His voice softened. Go see her, Layla. Share the good news. The car will bring you back tomorrow morning. The line went dead. When she looked up, Marco was watching her with something that might have been sympathy. He's not usually like this, Marco said quietly. Considerate, I mean, you're different for him. Different how? Marco just shook his head. Above my pay grade, cars waiting downstairs. As Leela gathered her things, Nina approached one last time. Can I ask you something? Nina whispered. Did you have a choice in taking this job? Leela thought about her mother, about the transplant scheduled for next week, about the cage she'd walked into with eyes wide open. There's always a choice, she said. Sometimes they're just all bad except one. Nina nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I thought too. As the elevator descended, Lila caught a glimpse of herself in the polished steel doors. She looked different already, wearing the lab coat with her name embroidered on it, holding the encrypted phone security badge at her hip. She looked like she belonged here. The thought terrified her more than any threat Marco had described. Because part of her, the part that had run her hands over that beautiful equipment, that had felt the thrill of having unlimited resources, actually did want to belong here. In Alessandro Marchetti's world. In his cage. Even if she was starting to suspect the cage was much larger and more elaborate than she'd imagined. 3 weeks after the surgery, the hospital room no longer smelled like metal and bleach. Sun poured through wide windows, and Leela's mother walked slow, steady laps with a nurse counting softly beside her. Color had returned to her cheeks. When she saw Leela, her smile crumpled into grateful tears. It feels like breathing for the first time, her mother said, pressing Leela's hands between warm, living fingers. But this man, your employer, what does he want exactly? Mom's Leela kissed her temple. He wants me to run a lab, that's all. Men who move mountains don't do it for nothing, her mother warned. Just keep your soul, Anu. Leela promised she would. The truth was trickier, because the moment she stepped from the hospital's private elevator to the waiting black car, it felt like the city rearranged itself to suit her. Doors opened, lines disappeared, problems dissolved under invisible hands. Convenience had a shape, Alessandro's. At the facility, the lab buzzed with efficient life. Nina had organized the chromatograms she'd asked for. Marco had replaced 2 locks with biometric redundancies, just in case. Every instrument Leela touched felt calibrated for her, as if someone had studied the angle of her wrists and set the world to match. She was good here, better than she'd remembered, when she adjusted the temperature gradient on an HPLC run and untangled a stubborn impurity peak. Satisfaction rose clean and bright. The work mattered. The science sang. The technicians learned her rhythms quickly, and even the cynical courier who handled priority clients started greeting her with something like respect. Alessandro appeared more often, never announced, simply there, framed in glass, leaning in a doorway, a coffee placed quietly within reach. He learned she hated syrups, loved almond milk, took sugar only when she was exhausted. He asked precise questions that proved he read every report, then fell silent to listen, truly listen, when she explained her decisions. It was disarming. It was infuriating. It was intoxicating. The intrusions began as kindnesses. Her old landlord called to say the remainder of her lease had been handled. The key card to her new building awaited at the front desk, along with a concierge who remembered her mother's soft spot for lilies. Security, Alessandro said when she confronted him. The previous place was porous. A company sedan replaced her aging car. Groceries materialized in her kitchen with her preferred brands lined up like soldiers. Efficiency, he said, as if that made the choice hers. The night he insisted on dinner, he didn't dress the demand as a request. 7, his message read. Black car, not optional. The restaurant's windows were dark to the street. Inside, candles pooled light along a narrow ribbon of linen. No other diners. A string quartet somewhere in the bones of the building played something aching and old. Alessandro stood when she entered, tugged out her chair, and watched her like every word mattered. When she spoke about pain pathways and receptor modulation, the thesis she'd abandoned, his attention sharpened until the rest of the world blurred. This, more than the private dining room or the silent staff, undid her. He treated her mind like it was valuable metal. Your work is a blade, he said when she paused. It can cut crueler hands free or arm them. I intend the former. And the latter, she pressed. He didn't flinch. I don't sell you to wolves, Lila. She should have refused dessert out of principle. Instead, she let him order a burnt sugar thing that cracked like thin ice. When he drove her home himself, the city lights threw gold on his profile, softening edges she knew were knives. At her door, he lifted his hand, hesitated like a man restraining himself from touching a masterpiece, then let the backs of his fingers skim her cheek. Warmth arrowed to places she didn't name. You're remarkable, he said, voice low. I hope you're beginning to see that. When the door closed, she pressed her spine against it and exhaled hard. The luxury building was quiet in the way money is quiet. In her kitchen, the kettle clicked alive at exactly 8 as if the apartment could hear her footsteps. On the counter, a paper bag from her favorite cafe, no note. Inside, her exact almond. A croissant, not a guess, a knowing. She sent a single message to his work line. You don't have to keep doing this. She deleted it, typed understood instead. The next morning, she sank into the hum of the lab, into purity curves and spectral fingerprints, into the work that made her feel less like prey and more like a scientist again. Between runs, she visited her mother, who was already learning how to protect a future again. Nutrition consults, medication schedules, a tentative plan for a garden in spring. Tell your boss I will make him dumplings, her mother said solemnly, but I still don't trust him. Me neither, Leela admitted, and found that the truth sat uneasily beside gratitude. Back at the facility, Alessandro hovered at a distance. When their paths crossed, heat climbed her throat at the memory of his fingers on her cheek. He didn't push. He didn't have to. The city itself conspired for him. That evening, the concierge informed her a delivery had arrived. A set of books, each one a title sheet, once marked in an abandoned wish list. The spines formed a gradient across the shelf. The kettle breathed on. The panel blinked green, green, green. The cage was beautiful. It fit like a custom suit. And for the first time, Leela wondered if beauty could be another kind of lock. From her window, she watched the night stitch itself across the city, a velvet curtain closing on an act she hadn't agreed to perform. Far below, a car door shut with a polite click that still managed to sound like a verdict. She told her reflection, sharp-eyed and unfamiliar, stay sharp. It didn't answer. It didn't need to. The kettle sang, her phone lit, driver at 7:30, shipment audit, I want your eyes on it. She finished the croissant standing at the glass, tasting sugar and surrender, then turned off the kettle and set 2 mugs on the counter, one for tea, one for resolve. The door locks purred, content as a cat. The cage held. And she traitorously was learning how to breathe inside it. The shipment audit should have been dull. Chain of custody checks, randomized sampling, routine certifications, comforting because they were predictable. Leela powered up her console, called up the dashboard, and reached for her first cue. The folder was already open. Residential surveillance, Chen. She didn't click it, she didn't breathe. For a long, stuttering second, she just stared at the letters, as if looking alone could mutate them into something else. Her hand betrayed her. The folder bloomed into tiles, elevator camera, lobby entrance, hallway outside 23F, the exact angle of her door as she keyed in, the timestamp of 8:12 p.m. when she stood still and told a piece of glass to stay sharp. Another tile, the hospital corridor where her mother walked laps, recorded from above. Her stomach dropped through her shoes. Heat rushed her face, then cold. She slapped the lid down as if the screen might bite. Across the lab, Nina straightened at the sound. You. Okay. Leela couldn't hear her own voice over her heartbeat. I need to speak to Alessandro. She didn't wait for Nina's warning shake of the head. The private elevator recognized her badge now. It whisked her to the 4th floor in a silvered hush. She didn't knock. She shoved the office door open so hard it bumped the stopper. Alessandro was at the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms, speaking low into a phone in Italian. He ended the call without looking startled, not surprised, not here. He turned slowly, assessing the heat coming off her like a weather front. You're watching me, Leela said. Her voice was flat and too loud both at once. Everywhere. Protecting you, he corrected calmly. There's a difference. From what? From having a life, She took 3 hard steps forward, palms braced on the edge of his desk. The hallway outside my door, the hospital, that's not protection, that's obsession. His jaw flexed once. Yes, he said, it is, and I won't apologize for surviving the way I had to learn to. I didn't consent. You did when you signed with me. I signed a contract, not a surrender. He came around the desk, stopping just out of reach. 3 days ago, he said evenly, someone asked a nurse at St. Catherine's about a Chinese biochemist with a sick mother. That someone works for the Calvetti family. They have pieces of your old research, your model for a compound that masks pharmaceutical trackers. Do you understand what that buys in my world? An invisible supply chain, no oversight, no accountability. That makes you leverage. A dozen protests crowded her throat and died there. It was theoretical. I didn't finish. You don't have to finish it for them to force you to try. His voice softened without losing steel. I'm building walls faster than they can find doors. You built a cage, she shot back, even as the floor under her tilted with the terror of names she'd only heard whispered. I ringed. You with teeth, he said, so the wolves swallow blood before they ever smell yours. Poetry from a man with cameras in my hallway. She tried to shoulder past him. He moved faster, palm flat against the door, not barring her with force, barring her with presence. Leave if you want, he said. Walk into a city where men who hate me and know I love you will make you pay for it. The word struck like a slap, love. She flinched in spite of herself, and his eyelids lowered, a tell she hadn't known he had. Don't you dare use that word to excuse this, she said. I'm using it to name the truth you already feel, he returned, too quiet. And I will not watch the only good thing in my life be taken because my pride refused cameras. She opened her mouth to argue, to curse, to say anything that would shatter his certainty, when the window shattered instead. The crack was a single sharp clap, followed by the high whine of stressed glass and the hiss of winter air. A spiderweb star burst. Open where his city view used to be, he hit her like a hurricane, arms around her, twisting, driving her down behind the desk as the second shot chewed a line across the edge of the credenza. Glass sleeted over them. Marble burned her knees. Alessandro's body covered hers entirely, a human shield that smelled like cedar and danger. Security was already in the doorway, boots, guns, clipped radio codes. 2 shots from the east roofline, someone barked. Counter-snipers moving. Warmth dotted her temple. She touched it, red, not hers. Alessandro, she tried to push up. His hand caged the back of her head, pressing her down as a third round punched into the wall and whined off into a bookshelf. I'm fine, he said, and it sounded like a lie taught to him so young it had become a mother tongue. His breath ghosted her ear. This is why, he breathed, not quite steady now. I watch you. The moment they knew you mattered, you became a target. Get her out, Marco snapped from somewhere. Oh, above them. Safe room, Alessandro countered, moving with her as if they shared a single skeleton. He hauled her up beneath the desk's cover and guided her across the room in a crouch. The bookshelf on the interior wall clicked when he pressed 2 hidden panels. It swung inward to reveal a narrow, steel-mouthed throat of a hallway lit with cold LEDs. The world outside dissolved into commands and footfalls. Inside the passage, the air settled into a medicinal chill. Leela's hands shook uncontrollably, shock washing through in waves that left her hollow and bright. Alessandro turned, crowding the door as it sealed. Blood tracked from his hairline down his temple, narrow and obscene on skin kept too carefully unmarred. She reached for him on instinct. He caught her hands, held them away from his face like he didn't trust himself not to lean in. I told you, he said, voice raked raw. I told you there are men who would carve you out of your life to get to me. And your solution was to carve me first. My solution was to make it impossible. His grip loosened. I failed in degrees. Who was it? Calvetti money, he said. They want your mind and my humiliation on the same day. You can't fix this with more cameras, she said, hearing the thread of hysteria try to creep in and strangling it before it reached her throat. You can't monitor a bullet. I can end the man who fired it. He studied her, gaze sweeping her face like a checklist, eyes clear, pupils even, no blood. A tiny, terrible relief cracked across his expression. And I can take you somewhere they don't know how to reach. A smaller cage. A safer one. She pressed her palms flat to the cold metal wall because if she put them on him again, she might not stop. You don't get it. I want not freedom, she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty, but choice. Something complicated flickered through his eyes. You chose your mother, he said. Now choose how you survive, with me or against wolves. It wasn't fair, it was true. She hated it. Outside the door, boots thundered past. Inside, the lights hummed. Alessandro's blood reached his jaw and fell, a bright, singular drop on the floor at their feet. He broke first. I'm sorry, he said, like it cost him bone. About the cameras, about the way I know how many steps you take from the elevator to your door, about the fact that I can't promise to stop because I won't bury you. Then don't pretend it's only protection, she said, meeting him head-on. Call it what it is. He didn't look away. Obsession, he said simply, and war. Sirens rose in the building like a tide. Somewhere, a radio crackled, satisfied, shooter neutralized. Alessandro exhaled once, slow. We're leaving, he said, decision hardening in his mouth. Now. Where? Where the teeth are thicker. He touched the panel, the safe room door unsealed with a sigh, and where no one breathes your name without my permission. Layla stepped through, pulse still ricocheting under her skin, and understood something with an awful, crystalline clarity. The crack in the window wasn't the only crack opening. Something fundamental in the architecture of their arrangement had split. Light would pour through it, or wolves. Maybe both. Understood. I'll keep these extremely short cinematic, like the last two you approved. The safe house was silent in a way the city never was, trees instead of sirens, space instead of claustrophobic walls. Leela paced the bedroom like a trapped nerve, while Alessandro met with his men downstairs. When he finally came to her, tie gone, shirt undone at the throat, he looked like a man who had once been made of steel and now carried cracks beneath the surface. You made me a target, she said. No, he answered quietly. Your brilliance already made you a target. I just happened to see it first. Marco brought intel. The Calvettis wanted to kidnap her and force her to reproduce that theoretical compound she abandoned years ago. If she succeeded, drug routes would become invisible, worth billions. They'll never stop, Alessandro said, not as long as you exist unprotected. His voice lowered. I can end this, but when I end it, there's no world where you walk back to anonymity. You stay under me, permanently. Leela sat on the edge of the bed, pulse steady in the worst way, resignation, calculation, a strange cold clarity. Freedom now meant running forever. Freedom meant her mother being hunted. Freedom meant looking over shoulders until she died of something worse than bullets, paranoia. You're not offering safety, Leela whispered. You're offering ownership. No, he stepped closer. I'm offering survival. My survival depends on yours. That's the difference. He said it like confession. He said it like oath. When he kissed her, she didn't stop it. Fear, desire, battle lines, all blurred. She kissed him back because some cages are safer than the wild. And because some obsessions swallow the world around them before anyone can run. 1 month later, the war was over. The Calvettis fell apart in the news, federal takedowns, turf fractures, sudden disappearances, but Leela never asked the details. She didn't want to know which parts of Alessandro's hands stayed clean. Her lab expanded, new resources, international partnerships. She wasn't verifying compounds anymore. She was designing new medical pathways, ethical ones, the kind she dreamed of before life broke her. Her mother moved to a quiet, gated estate owned by Alessandro, gardens, private physical therapy, a full nursing staff if needed. She smiled again. On Friday nights, Leela didn't stand on the stage at Crimson Rose anymore. She sat in Alessandro's VIP balcony beside him, no longer the watched, but the one who could see the whole board. In his office one evening, Alessandro slid a contract across the table, partnership, not employment. "You're not beneath me," he said. "You're beside me." "Equal," she signed without hesitation. The velvet cage had become her throne, not because she loved captivity, but because she'd chosen the kingdom. And chosen the king. 2 predators, 1 empire. When they stood at the glass looking over the glittering city, his hand rested on her waist like a vow, and she leaned into him because she knew the truth now. Some cages aren't made of bars. Some are made of a man who will burn the world before he lets it take you. And sometimes, that is the closest thing to freedom she'll ever want.